Well, to stare at that for a while and figure out what was going on. Hi, this is still the 10th of May, 2014, still Mother's Day. And we're back. We are cutting a video for YouTube, as well as with our regular Sunday evening live Bible study. We are in the book of Acts. On Sunday morning, we study a variety of things. Right now, we're studying about the nature of sin and what constitutes a sin. Sunday evenings, we are in the New Testament, and we are in the middle of chapter 21 of Acts, where we will continue on in just a few moments. And on Wednesday nights, we are in the Old Testament, and we are in the fairly close to the beginning of the divided kingdom, where Israel was divided into the upper and lower, or northern and southern portions, and each one was ruled by a different king. Let me give you a little bit of a background for where we're going this evening. Paul was Jewish. Paul was really Jewish. The idea that Jesus was a Jewish Savior, Messiah, was not only foreign to him, but disgusting. He encouraged, when he was a younger man, and partly participated in the stoning of one of the first deacons. He got special letters of permission from the leaders of the temple in Jerusalem to go around and find as many Jews as were looking to Jesus as Messiah as he could, have them brought back to Jerusalem and punished, until the chapter 9 of Acts, when he was on the road to Damascus, Syria, and he saw a light and heard a voice that said, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He said, "Me? I'm not persecuting anybody." Jesus said, "When you persecute my followers, you are persecuting me." He then became the greatest evangelist, the greatest church planter that the Mideast has ever seen. Hi, guest. Welcome. I guess you can see what I have written up here. Do I know you? Are you a friend of mine? Have you been on before? Don't feel like you have to answer. Sit back, have a cup of coffee, and enjoy yourself. After I finish with the video, we'll chat if you like. And if you'd like to see pictures of our newborns, you can either go to Preacher with Parrots on YouTube. We made a video about an hour ago. Or you can wait, and after this show, I'll get them out and share them with you. So this is, Paul had been to so many cities. He had planted so many churches. Hi, Granny. Glad to see you tonight. Granny, is the sound okay? I hadn't gotten a sound check from anybody before, so I'm hoping it's okay. I have no way of knowing unless somebody tells me that it's okay, or it sounds like I'm a chipmunk. Paul had been sent money. Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Paul had been sent money by the church in Macedonia and other churches, because the Christian brothers and sisters in Jerusalem were suffering financially because of a famine. He had hoped to get to Jerusalem in time for the Feast of the Passover, as did I hope to be there this month, which between the 20th and the 25th, which looks like I'm not going to make it, but perhaps it won't be too long after that until I can. That was his purpose in going to Jerusalem now. He had planted churches all over the Mideast. There was a problem. As I said at the beginning, nobody was more Jewish than Paul. Paul was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, very, very Jewish. Pharisees were part of those that made up the Sanhedrin that ruled the temple and so forth in Jerusalem. Along with the Pharisees, there were Sadducees. Hi, Dedek, glad to see you here too. Now, the Sadducees believed differently. You think the Protestants believe differently from the Catholics? Wow. We should have been around with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, not to speak of the Essenes, which were a few miles south of there in the Qumran area, and we've just been talking about the Essenes and the materials left behind in jars in caves in the area of the Dead Sea, basically the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Sadducees didn't believe in angels or demons. The Sadducees thought everything ended at death. So there were differences among them. Let me tell you one more thing before I get into tonight's lesson. And that was the relationship between the Roman government and Israel. Rome was the world leader. Aramaic and Greek was the language of the day. Even though other people spoke other languages, that was the common language that most of them spoke. Rome put up with the Jews and Israel. You know, if you are over or in charge of people, and you can have good fellowship with them, it makes your job a lot easier. If, for example, a prison guard or a police officer or whatever, if you're in charge of somebody else, but you treat them good and you try to keep on friendly terms, it makes your job easier. And so most of the Romans tried to get along with the Jews because it made their job better. By way of remembrance, remember when they were putting Jesus to death? The Romans could care less who Jesus said he was. If he said he was the Son of God, or if he didn't say he was, well, the Romans didn't care. The temple leaders, oh, they wanted to silence Jesus and get him out of the way. And so the Romans went along as much as they could just to make their job easier for them. Remember after Jesus' death that the centurion says, truly this man was the Son of God. So, now we go to Jerusalem. Paul has just arrived. Paul is being told, made to feel, that he wasn't really a good Jew. Even though he was a Pharisee. Even though before he was converted, he did everything he could to silence anybody who wasn't really Jewish. But because God chose him to be the church planter and the main evangelist. Remember, the difference between an evangelist and a pastor or another type of minister or preacher is that the evangelist goes to those who haven't heard the gospel. The Jews had heard it. They didn't understand their present situation in light of what was going on. They believed Messiah was coming. They believed everything in their scripture. They just didn't understand or believe that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Messiah they were waiting for. Paul was preaching Jesus to pagans, not to Jews, to those who either had no God or pagan gods. That didn't mean he had given up being Jewish. Many missionaries go through things like this that are similar. Probably some of you aren't aware of some of the things that missions departments and missionaries have to do in order to bring their kids up as good Americans. Many of them send their kids to English-speaking schools, even though they're living in another country, and they celebrate American holidays, just so that when their kids grow up and get on with their life, they grow up with the same thing that other American children and teenagers have, how they've grown up. So you can be living in another country, you can be associating with other people. That doesn't mean you've given up who you are. And Paul was being accused by the Jews of having given up being a good Jew. So now I'm going to have to move some things on my desk around here. Paul is being accused of not being a really good Jew, and now he's in Jerusalem bringing money to the Jews from Jews and Gentile believers in different countries where Paul has ministered. We ended about the I'm going to start with the 17th verse of the 21st chapter. And when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. Who were the brethren? I need to take care of, hang on just a moment. If some of the rest of you can help take care of that for me, it's one of the problems of doing two things at one time. Praise, if ever you can't do this, let me know and let me put, well, I can do one other thing. Okay, I'd intended to put somebody in that position. I apologize for those that are watching the video. It is a little Every once in a while when you do two things at the same time, you stub your foot. And so I apologize for a little bit of wasted time here. Now, Paul is being accused of not being really Jewish. There are some young men who have had planned to go into the temple for a special situation. And it was suggested that Paul go. Paul used to go to the synagogue whenever he could. Usually Saturday morning you would find him at the synagogue, and Sunday morning you would find him at a Christian church service someplace. But it was suggested, it said, and the day following, Paul went in with us. James and all the elders were present. This is James, the brother of Christ. By the way, his brothers did not accept him as Savior until after his resurrection. And I will try this week to put out a video for you that will give you some of that information that will explain what I'm talking about when I happen to mention things like the brothers or the half-brothers of Jesus. So he went to see James, who was actually appeared to be more of a leader in the minds of many than was Peter. He saw James, and all of the elders were present. Paul shows up, gives them the offering. And when he had saluted or greeted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. It's like a missionary comes home from the field. Somebody else comes back. And they say, you know what happened? We had so many saved when I was in such and such a city, and we went to such and such a place, and we built so many new churches and so forth. Paul was sharing what had been going on in his ministry and in the places where he had been. And when they heard of it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe. So they're being given information about non-Jews now that have come to Jesus. And now James and the Jewish believers from Jerusalem are saying to Paul, and we've had so many Jews who are now serving Jesus. And they were all zealous of the law. Let me go back and read that again. When they heard of it, that's the Gentiles that had been saved, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews which are believers, and they're all zealous, worked up, excited about the law. In other words, you can keep the law, go to temple on Saturday, rest on Saturday, do your sacrifices. Nobody said that in order to be a Christian, they had to stop keeping the 10 Commandments. They're all zealous of the law, and they are informed of thee. The Jews in Jerusalem, they've heard rumors about you. And this is what they're hearing. They're hearing, Paul, that you're teaching the Jews that are among the Gentiles they ought not circumcise their children, nor to walk after their customs. We have to think about what things that we or others do, that we do because of our faith or that we do because of our culture. I eat the food I eat because of the culture, either the culture that I have grown up in, or in my case, the culture that I have lived with for 60 plus years. I eat what I eat because the people in that culture, that's what they eat. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm half Polish and half UK. Has nothing to do with the fact of what religious faith I follow. It's part of my heritage. When a baby Jew goes to a bris and is circumcised, that says his parents are Jewish. When he or she is bar mitzvahed, that says they are Jewish. And they're informed. The people here in Jerusalem, especially the Christian Jews, have been told that you, Paul, those that follow you, Christians, Jewish Christians, Gentile Christians, they believe that you are telling the Jews that are with you among the Gentiles, because there was some of each in almost every city, that they should not circumcise their children and they should not walk after their customs. What is it therefore? So what is it, Paul? What are you teaching? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Pretty soon the news is going to spread, Paul. You're in Jerusalem. And the subject is going to come up. Do therefore this that we say to thee. We're going to ask you to do something, Paul. Do it, please. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. You may recall that there was a vow, for example, that John the Baptist took. He was a Nazirite from his birth. It had to do with what he ate, drank or didn't drink, how he wore his hair, and so forth. But he had made a vow. There were other vows, Jewish vows, that they could make. James, one of the great leaders, not one of the disciples, but one of the great leaders of the Jews and Christians in Jerusalem, said, we suggest you do this. These 4 men are going to go today into the temple and do things according to the vow they're going to take. Since you're Jewish, you don't live here in Jerusalem, but since you're Jewish, why don't you go into the temple and do a vow? And all the people will see this, and then they won't believe this business that you're telling people not to believe in Moses and David and not to circumcise their children. Them take and purify thyself with them. This had to do with bathing and so forth. Purify yourself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know these things. Normally at the beginning of a vow they would shave their head, and would make no changes then until the the vow, whatever they had promised to do in whatever period of time, was fulfilled. So that everybody will see you, and they'll know these things, that what they were informed about thee are nothing. They'll know that the stuff that they've been said is nothing. But that thou thyself also walkest orderly and keepest the law. Show us by what you do. Not by what you say, but by what you do here where we're watching you, that you keep the law. Now, wait a minute. Being saved has nothing to do with keeping the law. Being saved has nothing to do with being Jew or Gentile. But it seemed to James and the other elders that this was a good idea. As touching the Gentiles, now as far as the Gentiles are concerned, they're not Jews, but you, Paul, who are the great teacher, preacher, church evangelist, church planter, among the Gentiles, you happen to be Jewish. Now, as far as the Gentiles, verse 25, we believe, we've written it down, and we've concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication. Some years before, the subject had come up. And Paul had gone to Jerusalem and had talked with mainly James and Peter about how they could understand each other better, and how the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians should get along with each other. Remember, some of this now is their background, is their culture. You go into a church and you see youth that dress differently from people my age. That has nothing to do with their salvation, nothing to do with their faith. It has to do with the generation in which they grew up. So, whether they keep the law or don't keep the law has nothing to do with their salvation and their teaching of Scripture and what is right and wrong, and explaining of the doctrine that Paul does so beautifully, has nothing to do with anybody keeping the law. I can't wait until we get into the study of the book of Hebrews. It's my second favorite book in the entire Bible, after the one we're in, which is in the book of Acts. They had, a while back, agreed on certain things. That is, the leaders of the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, James and Peter and the others, and Paul and Luke and some of those that worked with him, they had agreed, okay, we are going to ask the Gentiles to give up certain things. Not because it's required for their salvation, not because Jesus or the Bible tells them to give it up, but we'll just come to an understanding because we want to get along. We want to let everybody know that we are of the same faith. We're all saved. So while eating something that's been offered to idols is a sin or not, we're not interested in that. We're interested in getting along. They agreed. The Jews asked Paul and the Gentiles if they would go along with it, and they agreed. What they agreed to do with is the following: not eat anything strangled. uh, one year, I think it was 1961 or 2, I was still living in trailer houses from my days as a full-time evangelist, and I was teaching at a Bible college. And a friend had chickens. He was also a teacher at the Bible college, and very practical person. Thought it was good laying eggs, having chickens to eat once in a while, but there was no fence, nobody was taking care of them, and they were getting in around my home. There was some grass around the trailer there on the campus. It wasn't a trailer park question, but it was, that's where my trailer was parked, and I'd come out and I'd be walking all over chicken stuff. And we agreed that, or I asked if they could either be put in one certain place, or we could have them for lunch or something, but not have them in my yard. And the students just went crazy. It was something new, something different to do. They chased chickens and roosters all over the place. And there was a belief among them that if you ate chicken meat and the chicken died by strangulation, the meat would not taste as good. Well, among the things that the Jewish Christians asked the Gentile Christians to do was to not eat meat that had been strangled. It's not a big deal. Are you willing so that we can get along? And no. Are you willing so that we can get along to not eat strangled? Sure. We're willing not to eat chicken, that meat that has been killed by strangulation. Sure. No problem. Are you willing not to eat meat that's been offered by to idols? You go in the store and you see that something's been marked down. It's half the price, but you got to eat it before tomorrow morning. Well, in those days, people would buy meat and offer it as a sacrifice to their idols. Not Christians, not Jews, but somebody else. And because it had sat for a couple of hours in front of an idol, they could then sell it, and somebody would eat it, and they'd pay half the price for it. Now, whether meat sat in front of an idol, not your meat, not your idol. But if you can buy a roast that some pagan, not you, you're not agreeing with his paganism, but some pagan put it in front of an idol for a couple of hours, and now you can get it and feed your family for half the price, would you agree not to do that for the sake of getting along? And the Gentile Christian said, sure. So it was things like that, small things they had agreed. Keep themselves from things offered to idols. Not because it was a sin, but because it offended the Jewish Christians. Could the Gentiles just not do that so that they could all get along? Could they not eat anything with blood in it? I know my mother, who was Polish, her family used to make duck blood soup. Did I eat any? No way. I didn't like the looks of it. I didn't like the sound of it. I was like a kid. My mama didn't make me eat what I didn't want to eat, and I didn't want to eat anything with blood. But they agreed. Nothing that was strangled, and from fornication. Fornication is sexual sin. So if you will not do those things in order to please the Jewish brothers, could you do that? That was the agreement they made. Now in verse 26. So Paul took them in the next day, purified himself with them. They went into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of the purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. In other words, they completed. Paul did what they asked him to do, and he did it within that time. Okay, now we go to verse 27. We're still in Acts 21. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the time that his purification and so forth, the Jews which were of Asia, they saw him in the temple, and they stirred up people, and they laid hands on him. They grabbed him. They wanted to fight him in the temple. And these Asian men cried out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place," meaning the temple. Men everywhere. Here's the man. He stirs people up. He's teaching against the people, against the law, against the temple. And he brought Greeks into the temple, and he polluted the holy place. There was an occasion where Paul asked one of his associates to become circumcised. He was not Jewish, so it wasn't part of his culture. It wasn't part of his family. But Paul asked him, "Would you do me the favor of being circumcised?" You don't have to be, because you're not Jewish. Paul had a reason. This was one of the reasons. Sometimes, in certain parts of the law, it didn't refer to somebody as a Jew, it referred to them as circumcised. And it didn't refer to somebody as a non-Jew, but it referred to them as somebody uncircumcised. In other words, it didn't say, don't take your friend who is Jewish to a lavish restaurant and buy him dinner. It would say, don't take an uncircumcised man to a restaurant and buy him dinner. You see the difference? By calling him uncircumcised, he was inferring that he wasn't Jewish. But he didn't use the exact word, and it could get tricky. So Paul asked a couple of his associates that weren't Jewish, "Do you mind becoming circumcised so that I will not be accused of spending time and having uncircumcised people as my associates?" It was not a big deal. For those that didn't understand why he did it, it seemed like a big deal. It wasn't. Paul was simply trying to avoid a problem, and if somebody, by using the word uncircumcised instead of Gentile, he could avoid a problem. And so if you people would remember that and sort of want to hold it against him like you are not really Jewish. For they'd seen him in the city of Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. Supposed. I'm going to do a sermon on supposed. We get into so many problems on what people suppose have no evidence, have no proof, no truth, but they just assume. An example. Y'all know that on Wednesday night I'm expecting a wall chart. The city where I live, about half of the houses don't have anybody living in them right now, at this very moment. Many celebrities have their second home here, or they'll have a boat here that they float on Lake Arrowhead. But they don't live here. They're up here once in a while. For that reason, now 50% of us, maybe now 60%. When I moved up here 17 years ago, it was 50-50. Of us live here all the time. But one of the birds, I think, is out. Just a minute. Maybe not. This morning they pulled on my shoes and almost ruined a couple pair, and the reason that they're out is that Mama and Daddy trade places on the nest, so I can't keep them in a cage, and I have to have them out so that they can, and that means that one of them is moving around sometimes looking for trouble to get into. All right, getting back to our lesson. Somebody had assumed, I was talking about part of the houses up here don't have anybody living in them. And so because of that, the post office does not deliver mail to people's houses. Half of the houses would have mail being delivered to it, and there's nobody there to pick it up. We have a great deal of difficulty. I don't give out my address. We're asked not to give out our address, except, oh, this is Mama. Just a minute. What, do we have Daddy on the nest? Because this is Mama. You're down there messing around with my shoes. Oh, come on, just make yourself happy or go do something, but don't mess around with my shoes. I ordered this chart, and apparently the people sending it out chose to send it by mail. Well, it gets to the post office. Post office says, we don't deliver to addresses, and send it back. I cannot get them to understand what the law is up here. And I wrote them a letter, I think, day before yesterday. If you wouldn't assume that every rural town, every mountain home, the post office is required to take things that you send there. You just assume that because you mail it, somebody's got to deliver it. And it ain't so. But assuming things can get you into trouble. So Amazon is pretty good trying to get sellers to do the right thing to their customers. And I just picked up yesterday a letter that the postmaster left in my box. I have to go a round trip of 10 miles to pick up a gas bill because they don't deliver. Now, UPS, fine, not a problem. We are not allowed to give out our address because it looks like an address anywhere else in the United States, and people are going to assume that the post office delivers, but they don't. And I wrote them a letter saying, if you would do what I ask you to do as a resident here and know how things are done here, instead of assuming that one city is going to be like every other city. You can't assume and it had been assumed this man teaches people against the law. He brought Greeks into the temple, and he polluted the holy place. First of all, they didn't know if these men were Greeks or not. They didn't know if they were circumcised or not. How do you pollute the holy place? For they had seen him in another city, and they supposed Paul had brought somebody to the temple. Now, on this supposition, the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul, and they pulled him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. This was done to stop a riot, to stop a problem. Doors going from one place to another were closed. And the whole city of Jerusalem, Jerusalem's not that big of a city, but the whole city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul. And they went about to kill him on a supposition. They thought he had uncircumcised people in the temple. And they went about to kill him. Tidings came to the chief captain of the band, and all Jerusalem was in an uproar. We have places in the U.S. Where every once in a while we have an assumption or a fact, but the whole city gets in an uproar, and they do crazy things. People will riot, and in rioting they hurt themselves. People in a city will get mad, and they will trash a grocery store, and then next morning Mama wants milk for the babies. Grocery store has been trashed. They want to watch television at night. They can't. Electric wires and cords have been trashed and taken down. This makes absolutely no sense. Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions. The word centurions, we remember it from the cross. It was a centurion that backed off after the hours of darkness, after they went to kill Jesus and found that he was already dead, so they didn't have to break his bones. After all of these things, the centurion said, "Verily, verily, this man was the Son of God." Centurion means the man was a leader over 100. Century, 100 years. Centurion, a military officer over 100 men. So they took soldiers and centurions and ran them down. And when they saw the chief captain of the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. Now, we have a situation here. Sometimes there are laws, they may or may not make sense. For example, in New York, where we have the United Nations, if you're a leader from some other country, you don't have to pay parking. And if you get tickets, you don't have to pay them. Does that make sense? Is it right? Of course it's not. It doesn't make sense. But since when do things have to make sense? Now, Paul was a Roman citizen, and Rome ruled the world. Oh yes, he was a Jew. but Rome ruled the world, and Roman citizens had rights that other peoples didn't have. Now, when they started beating Paul, that's not the same as beating somebody who is not a Roman citizen. The chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he'd done. Chain him up with double chains, tell me who he is and what did he do. And some cried one thing and some cried another. Why did they say? One says he did this, another one says he's so and so, this is what he did, somebody else said he did something. How did they? They didn't know. People in riots don't make sense. For the multitude of one people followed after, crying, away with him! Kill him! Get him out of here! And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was borne of the soldiers for the violence of the people. The soldiers were having to carry him and gather themselves around him and move him around because the people were so violent. Over what? Over they assumed that he had taken non-Jews into the temple in another city and had no clue. And the multitude of the people followed after him, crying, away with him! And as Paul was being led into the castle, he said to the chief captain, may I speak with thee? He asked one of the officers, can I have a word with you? And the person said, can you speak Greek? He was talking to Paul could speak. You name the language. You name the subject. He had a brilliant mind. But I guess they thought, oh well, we'll put you where you belong. We'll say, sure, talk to us in a language, assuming the person couldn't speak that language. And art thou not that Egyptian which before these days made an uproar and leddest out in the wilderness 4,000 men that were murdered? Didn't you do such and such? Paul said, what? I'm a man which am a Jew of Tarsus. Tarsus was in the eastern portion of what is now Turkey. The city of Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. This is not a little town. This is not a wide spot in the road. I am from and a citizen of a very important place. And I beseech thee, I beg you, let me speak to the people. And when they'd given him license, when they gave him permission, you want to speak to the people? Paul stood on the stairs and he beckoned with his hand. And when there was made a great silence, he spoke to them in the Hebrew tongue. Paul let them know, you want Jewish? I can talk Jewish. You want Catholic? I can speak Latin. You want to know who I am? Where my heart and soul is? Júntense y escuchen lo que les voy a contar. I've had people look at me with blue eyes and fair skin and assume years ago in the South, when there was a lot of discrimination, that I was anti-Mexican. Don't know where they got the idea. But all it took, when I got on the platform and opened the Bible and said, "Hermanos, les quiero contar algo en esta noche," that changed things. The fact that I could speak the language with the right accent told them, where is my heart and soul? And now he has something to say to the Jews. He doesn't say it in Greek. He doesn't say it in a Galilean accent. He speaks the purest Hebrew. I will give you the language of Moses. I will give you the language of the Psalms, of David. You want Hebrew? I'll show you Hebrew. And when he had given him license, he spoke to them in the Hebrew tongue, saying, and this is what he said. Now we're in Acts chapter 22. Men and brethren and fathers. Fathers? Yeah. Men, brethren, fathers, heads of families, heads of communities. Hear you the defense which I now make unto you. I'm being accused. This is my defense. Paul is about to give them what in a few months he's going to give the leaders of the world in Rome. Give Paul a chance to preach, you're going to get the gospel. Give him a corner to stand on and a group of people willing to listen. Doesn't make any difference what language you want. Paul can give it to you. This is my defense. And when they heard that he spoke in the Hebrew tongue, they became silent. No one sneezed. Nobody made a sound. I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city, Jerusalem, at the feet of Gamaliel, the most intelligent man in the world. Let's go into Yale. Okay? You could not be educated by a smarter man. Taught according to the perfect matter of the law of the fathers, and zealous toward God, as ye are all this day. I'm a lover of God, just like you religious leaders are lovers of God. Educated by the greatest educator alive. And I persecuted this way. Christians used to call each other saints, and non-Christians referred to them as the people in the way. The way of the cross, the way of Christ. You know, they called them people in the way. And they referred to each other as saints. I persecuted this way unto death those that were following Christ. I persecuted some of them to death. Remember, he encouraged and held the outer garments of those who stoned Stephen, the first deacon. You want to know how good a Jew I am? And I persecuted this way unto death, binding and delivering them into prisons, both men and women. I didn't care if they were men or women. I drug them into prison where I had them persecuted. And also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders from whom I received letters. The brethren and I went to Damascus to bring those that were there. I was going to bring them bound unto Jerusalem to be punished. Verse 6, and it came to pass that as I made my journey and I came nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light about me. He's giving his testimony of how he got saved. And I fell on the ground, and I heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? Well, a voice from heaven, you better have respect and reverence for it, because it isn't no common person, we guarantee you that. And they that were with me, they saw the light, and they were afraid. But they heard not the voice of him that spoke to me. They saw the light and they were afraid, but they didn't hear that voice. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise and go to Damascus. There it will be told you what you should do, and what's appointed for you to do. God had a plan. He said, Go into the city. You're near Damascus, go on into the city, and you'll be told what to do. And then when I could not see, he was blinded by the light. Remember, Moses' face shone, the reflection of the light, because God passed by him, and he had to cover his face with a veil, or the people looking at the brightness of his face would have gone blind, just if you stare at the sun. See, I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand. They had to take him around, the blind person, and lead him into the city of Damascus. And a man by the name of Ananias, a devout man according to the law. You want some Jewish person, you want law, you want Jewish, that's him. Having a good report of all Jews which dwelt there. You can't find a Jew in this nation that doesn't have something good to say about Ananias. He came to me and he stood and he said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. That's how we pray for people. And the same hour I looked up at him and he said, The God of our fathers has chosen you. Wow. You can't get more Jewish than Ananias. You can't get more Jewish than trying to bind and arrest people who are anti-Jewish. The God of our fathers has chosen thee, that thou should know his will, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one and see that the just one, that would be Jesus, and shouldst hear the voice of his mouth. God chose you to be healed of your blindness, and God chose you that you should know the just one, Jesus, and that you should hear the voice out of the mouth of God. And you shall be his witness unto all men of what you've seen and heard. You will swear in court, you will tell anybody who wants to listen what you have seen and what you have heard. And now, why tarriest thou? What are you laying around for? Get up and be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And it shall come to pass, this is his speech, in Hebrew, in case the Jews are wondering how Jewish is he. And it came to pass that when I came again to Jerusalem, while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance. I was being blessed. Lost my place. It shall come to pass that when I come to Jerusalem, I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and I saw him saying to me, make haste, hurry, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. Lord said, get out of Jerusalem. They're not going to accept your testimony. They're not going to believe you. And I said, Lord, they know that I was imprisoned and beat in every synagogue, them that believed on you. They know what I did in the past. It's like some of my former students were drug addicts, very well-known drug addicts in the drug trade. Everybody knew it. You don't have to convince anybody. When those people come to the Lord, people see the difference. And I said, Lord, they know I was in prison. And when the blood of Stephen, that martyr, was shed, I also was standing by and consented unto death, and kept the raiment, the clothing, of those that slew him. And he said unto me, depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. The Lord told him, leave here. I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. See, they were suspicious of him because he was ministering to Gentiles. But God had sent him to the Gentiles. And they gave him audience under the word, and they lifted up their voice and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for it's not fit that he should live. He gives his testimony, and how do they accept it? Get rid of him. He doesn't deserve to be alive. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes, they threw dust into the earth. When they would riot or get upset, they would take their clothes off. They threw dirt in the air. The chief captain commanded them to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he should be beaten, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. Why is everybody so against him? See, the chief captain, the Romans don't understand this Jewish Gentile thing, because they're not religious. For them, the whole thing is political. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said, oh, we're going to get to it now. You want politics? You're going to get politics. The captain didn't know why they were so worked up and against him. And Paul called the centurion, the military officer who was in charge of 100 soldiers. He called the one that was standing by, and he asked him a question. This is his question. Is it lawful for you to scourge a Roman that's uncondemned? First of all, can you, a Roman officer, beat me, a Roman citizen? Can you do that? Number two, I'm uncondemned. You have no reason to beat me. There's no charge against me. When the centurion heard that, he told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest. Careful. Be careful with this guy. This man is a Roman. You can do it to a Jew. You can do it to an Asian. But Rome rules the world, and he is a citizen of Rome. Be very careful. And when the centurion heard that, he went and he told the chief captain, saying, "Take heed, this man's a Roman." The chief captain came and he said, "Tell me, art thou a Roman?" And he said, "Yea." And the chief captain answered, "With a great sum obtained I this freedom." And Paul said, "But I was freeborn." The chief captain said, "I'm a Roman because I bought and paid for my citizenship with money." And Paul said, "But I was born a Roman." One of my neighbors was from Africa, South Africa. He came home one day and he had gone through the citizenship thing. And he said, "I'm a citizen now. I'm the same as you." Said that to me, and I said, "No, you're not." I said, "Because I could be president and you can't. To be president of the United States, you must be born in the country or in one of the countries that, like, that we owned or oversee, like Puerto Rico." And he became an American citizen, but I still had one step up on him, because you must be born here. Even though you're an American citizen, you must be born here to become president. There is a difference. Then straightway, so the man said, and Paul said, "I was born free." And straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. They should have checked. They should have their facts, but they didn't. And straightway they departed from him, and the chief captain was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, because he'd bound him. He just assumed that the guy wasn't Roman. Didn't look like a Roman, looked like a Jew. On the morrow, because he loosed him from his bands, and he commanded the chief priests and their council to appear. And they brought Paul down and set him before him. I'm looking at the clock now, and I'm thinking that this is a fairly good place to stop. Let me read a couple more verses. We're now in chapter 23. We started at the 17th verse of 21. So we finished 21 and we've done 22. Let's do a couple of verses in 23. That'll give us 2 chapters. "And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. I have broken no law. I'm a good citizen. I'm a good person. And the high priest Ananias," where have we heard the word Ananias? Well, this is in the year 58. What happened in the year 33? When Jesus was tried. before the high priest, whose name was Ananias. That was 33, 43, 53, about 25 years before. Same high priest. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Paul says, I have lived in good conscience until this day. And the high priest said, smack him in the mouth. And then Paul said unto him, God will smite you, thou whited wall. You know what whitewashing is? I sort of do. I've never really seen it or really done it, but it's cheaper than paint. And when you have old buildings and they just get dirty, and you just, in the days when some people were really poor, you could make a pretty good improvement by whitewashing something. Paul said, God will smite you, thou whited wall. You've just had some fake, not even real paint poured on you to try to make you look good. You sit in judgment of me after the law, and you command me to be smitten against the law. You gave the order to have me smacked in the mouth. And you are a judge. And you give an illegal command? And they that stood by said, revilest thou God's high priest? You telling God's high priest what he can and can't do? And Paul said, I wish not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it's written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people, but, oh, here comes Paul's super intelligence. At the beginning of tonight's program, I gave you a few facts that we might need to build on during the program. And I told you that there was a difference between the Essenes and the Sadducees and the publicans. The Essenes were those who copied scriptures and the materials that were written in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Sadducees were very intelligent, wealthy people, but not so religious. They didn't believe in angels, they didn't believe in demons, they didn't believe in the hereafter. They believed when you die, you're dead, that's the end of it. A great number of those sitting on the Sanhedrin were Sadducees. They were the wealthy ones. They had the political clout. The others were more religious. They were sort of the middle class, and they were the Pharisees, like Paul, but they were really more sincere and more religious. When Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, hey everybody, listen up, I'm a Pharisee. I'm the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. Hey, that half of you that believes like me that we're going to answer before God, I believe like you. And guess what? I'm being accused of what I believe. And he's talking to those that are on the Sanhedrin that make decisions. Of the hope of the resurrection of the dead, I am called into question. And when he had said that, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. So what he did, his enemies, he turned them against each other. And by making them fight against each other, hopefully they would stop his fight against him. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit. But the Pharisees confess both, that there is resurrection and that there are spirits and angels. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes, now the scribes, who were they? The scribes were those who copied the law. Or if you wanted to send a letter, you spoke it and they wrote it down. Scribes, escribir in Latin, to write. They knew a lot because their job, 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, was to write, to make copy of books. And so they knew so much because they copied all these important facts. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees, they arose and they strove, saying, to strive is to be against. We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. The Pharisees believed in the afterlife, and they believed in angels. And those Pharisees said, if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, we're not going to fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces. If this had gotten to where they did physical damage to him being a Roman citizen and not being condemned of any crime, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force and to bring him onto the castle. I'm about to end and I need my pen to make my little mark. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, the Lord now is talking to Paul, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you've testified of me in Jerusalem, so must you bear witness of me in Rome. Not just anybody can go to Rome and give their testimony for Jesus. You got to be welcome. Somebody's got to be willing to let you speak. Paul was a Roman soldier, was a Roman citizen. He could demand to be heard by important people. The rest of them couldn't. Paul could. He had to go to Rome because he had the opportunity of telling Roman world leaders, bigwigs in society and in world politics, about Jesus and the cross of Christ. Nobody else had that opportunity. And Jesus said, Paul, be of good cheer. You testified of me in Jerusalem. Now you're going to bear witness of me in Rome. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together. They bound themselves under a curse, saying, we will neither drink nor eat until we have killed Paul. And there were more than 40 in this conspiracy. More than 40 men said, we will not eat or drink until Paul is dead. And they came to the chief priests and the elders, and they said, we have bound ourselves together under a great curse, and we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. I'm checking the clock. Looks like I might go till my time runs out. Now therefore, you with the council signify to the chief captain that he will bring him down into you tomorrow, as though you would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. This is what we want you to do. We want you to bring him, to call him. Pretend like you got to question him some more. And when we got him here, we're going to kill him. Sounds like Murder, She Wrote, doesn't it? And when Paul's sister's son, his nephew, heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions, a military officer over 100 soldiers. And he said, bring this young man into the chief captain, for he has something to tell you. My nephew, this young man, bring him into the head guy. He's got something to tell you. So they took him and they brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee. He has something to say to thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately, and he said, what is it that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that you would bring down Paul tomorrow to the council, as though they want to ask something more. But do not yield to them, for they lie in wait for him. Of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, looking for a promise from you. And the chief captain let the young man depart, and charged him, said to him, see that you tell no man that you have told me these things. And now, that is the end of chapter 22. No, it isn't. Sorry. I see chapter 23 up there, but it's verse 23. We're already in 23. And he called him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers. See, what I've been telling you about centurions is correct. Each one was over 100 soldiers. So they call 2 centurions, and they say, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 60, 10. A score is 20, so that's 60 plus 10 is 70. So they're going to have 200 military men and 70 spearmen and 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. So 70 and 2, let me back up. 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. 60 and spearmen 200. Okay, so there's 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen, you know, with a spear, at the 3rd hour of the night. It gets dark about 6. 3 hours would be about 9 o'clock at night, our time. They're about 3 hours from the time it gets dark. And provide them beasts, and they may set Paul on a beast, on an animal, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. We are going to deliver him to the top men and keep him safe. And he wrote a letter after this manner. And I guess I can read the letter. This is what the letter is going to say. He's going to make himself look good in his letter. I mean, that's life. He wrote a letter. Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth the greeting. Appropriately addressing the greeting as he should. This man, the one that they're bringing, these 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen, this man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then I came with an army, and I rescued him. Then rescued him. He found out from his nephew what the plan was. But he said, then I came with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council. I needed to know, what's your problem? What are you accusing him of? When I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, I found out it has nothing to do with Roman law, it's religious stuff. This man was taken of the Jews. It should, let's see, I perceived that it had to do with their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or bonds. It's religious stuff. Like, they can't take you to court because maybe you didn't cross yourself when you passed a church. Nothing to do with either killing somebody or putting them in bonds. And nothing worthy of death. And it was told me how the Jews laid in wait for this man. I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers, also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. They took Paul, and they brought him by night to Antipatris. That's about as far as we can go. This is May 10, 15 p.m. And this is where we start next Sunday. Let me close our video that I'm making on Ustream. And if you have any questions or anything you want to chat about, we'll do that in just a moment. Hang on. And for those that have been viewing the video, until the next video, blessings on you.